I'm sure, like me, you have loads of questions you want to ask about having just watched that video. Questions like, does the vicar deserve help more than a rough sleeper? Does appearances make that much difference about who we help? So this morning we're going to look at the Good Samaritan. I know it's something we've talked about many a time, and whether it been in our youth or in church, but I think the Good Samaritan story is so appropriate to where we are today. In the Good Samaritan story, Jesus is asked, who exactly is our neighbour? In the command, love your neighbour as yourself, where do you draw the line? Who am I meant to love? Who's my neighbour even? Jesus tells a story about the guy who is helped, not by good people or religious people, but by a man nobody in the audience likes. A man who is meant to be the enemy. He asked, which one of these acted like a neighbour towards the man attacked by the robbers? So the question this morning is, what's our limit? For us, the Good Samaritan story is about two questions. What does it look like to love someone? How far would you go to help someone in need? Would you give 2 minutes of your time, your coat, your spare room? And I know you're asking, that's more than two questions, but all these all lumped together is how do you love someone, and what would you willing to give? Is anyone off limits? Interesting one, that one. Do we love everybody? Don't matter who they are, what they are. Are there basic boundaries? And sort of, would you treat everyone equally with the same amount of love? Do you think all our fellow human beings deserve the same kind of compassion? Or are those some people you don't care about? And that's not in a nasty way, because I'm sure we all have, I like this person, but I like that person more. But we're talking about compassion and that lovely expression, what would Jesus do? So our scripture this morning we're going to read is from Luke 10:25 to 37, and I'm using the NIV translation. It's titled, The Parable of the Good Samaritan. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify it himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbour? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he travelled, came from where the man was, and he saw him, and he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you any extra expenses you have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of the robber? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." So what does the Good Samaritan mean to you? I'm going to read a few stats which the Bible Society had done during some questionnaire, asking the UK public some questions about the Good Samaritan. You know, it's a phrase you still hear and how they describe various people. He's been a Good Samaritan. Of course, there's also the helpline called the Samaritan. So what does it mean today? What does it mean to be a Good Samaritan today? Well, it's interesting, some facts here. Again, this is carried out by the Bible Society. He said 31% do something at a small cost to yourself, e.g. giving some directions, volunteering, giving money to someone, i.e. for a train ticket home. 31% said there would be a small cost involved. Interestingly, 20% said doing something at a potentially significant cost to yourself, e.g. jumping into a river to save someone else, or stopping to help at an accident, also referring to a car accident. And 19% said doing something good for someone you don't like or wouldn't normally associate with. Now that's an interesting one, only 19%. Do we know all our neighbours? Because I know the question I ask myself, I know some of my neighbours. I wave in the morning and the evening, but do I really know my neighbours? So the question I have for myself and to yourself, who is our neighbour? The teacher was asking Jesus, who do I technically have to help in order to fulfill the law? Just Jews? My neighbours? And if it's my neighbours, how many? One or two? The whole road? The town? The community? Interestingly, a recent poll conducted by the Bible Society asked people in the UK whether they would lend a mobile phone to a stranger who said they needed to make an urgent call, and we saw that in the video. But interestingly, there's some stats which actually backed up the video we just watched. The first question, or the first answer was given, was depending on who we're asking. So not just generally anybody you asked, but depending on who you're asking, their appearance. Whilst 39% said they would lend their phone to an elderly woman, and 26% to a professional woman in a suit. Why it's in a suit, but it's just one of the stats. But only 15% would do the same for a woman they thought was homeless. Interesting, just by appearance made a difference whether they would lend their mobile phone. Like the teacher who questioned Jesus, do we only recognize people who are like us? How we dress, how we behave. So do we recognize our neighbours if they are like me or you? Also, do we weigh out the person's background? Are they worth or are they worthless? Before we will help them. Now that's an interesting question. How do you know if a person is worth or worthless? Food to ponder. The survey also found that 19% of people thought that being a modern-day Good Samaritan involved doing somebody or doing good for somebody you wouldn't like or would associate with. So it's interesting that only 19% of people thought that being a modern-day Good Samaritan involved doing good for someone you like or wouldn't associate with. But what's the point of this story? Jesus is talking to a teacher of the law. The first two people in the story, a priest and a Levite, are religious people, like the teacher, experts in knowing God. They were also technically neighbours of the injured man, being a fellow Jew. You would expect them to do the right thing. The Teacher would have also considered the third man, the Samaritan, to know nothing about God. He would have thought of him as a person who believed in the wrong things, doing in all the wrong things, and not being of like him. But who actually obeys the greatest commandment in his story? It's not the religious experts. It's the person who helps someone very different from himself, maybe even considered an enemy. Jesus is saying there are no categories or rules about who we should help. Every fellow human being is our neighbour. And the Samaritan is a good example of what it looks like to really love our neighbours. So a few questions, and you may want to pause whilst you're thinking about this or share within your family. Why is it difficult to act like the Good Samaritan? And I suppose moving on, why didn't the priest and the Levite help the man in the story, even though they knew God? It's interesting that the video shows that not much has changed back then and even today. Why don't we always help the person in need? A bit like the phone call earlier. But interestingly, there are some concerns that stop us, and these are some of the examples which were picked up during the survey. The first one being safety and security. When asked people why they might not help a stranger, the two top reasons were given: if I might get hurt, and if I felt like I didn't trust the person. And that's exactly the same when we read the story in the Bible. The priest and the Levite may have been scared to linger on what was classed as a dangerous road. They also could have been robbed. They also might have considered it was a trap. So the question is, are we too suspicious? Do we worry that people will be ungrateful or take advantage of us? And the ultimate question is, does it matter? Because we are actually going to help that person. The second point which was raised was reputation. The priest and the Levite could have become ritually uncleaned by touching a man if he was dead. But were they in touch with God's priorities? Do we want to be friends with the awkward person who gets bullied maybe, or the bad person? The video suggests we find it easier to help someone who is more like us. The well-dressed man who has lost his wallet rather than the refugee. So the question is, do we have trouble recognizing our neighbours? The third point, a bit like the phone call, and I must admit, to be honest with you, I wasn't actually phoning one, but I know you knew that anyhow, is to do about time. We often consider ourselves too busy, always in a hurry. We don't have the time. But does this stop us notice and helping people in need around us? Do we have time and space in our lives to help people in front of us? If we don't, do you think we should make changes to have that time to support one another and those we don't know, our neighbours? The fourth point was about possessions, money and personal cost. The priest and Levite might not have wanted to get involved as a man was clearly hurt. He had just been beaten up, left half dead. And helping him would have involved a lot of effort and expense. So the question to ourselves is, does protecting our stuff and our comfortable way of life take priority? Do we think it's not my problem instead of taking on that responsibility? Interestingly, in a recent poll, people were asked what is the most they would lend to a stranger who needed to buy a train ticket, and here we're referring to finance. Most people, 25% actually, said they would not lend anything. 21% said £5 was the maximum, and only 2% would lend over £20. So I'm going to stop there a minute. Let's have a time of worship before I finish off in prayer.